Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to our formidable guest, Fatima Voda, the Managing Director of 274 Group, and Muitheri Wahome, the author of the book that we will be looking into today. The name of the book is called Building Capital, A History of Asset Management in South Africa. Both these women have over 2 decades of experience within the financial services sector, so it is really an honor and a privilege for me to engage with them here today. First and foremost, I'm going to ask Muitheri to please come up to the podium. Muitheri will give us a history of the asset management industry so that it can give all of you context as to why we are so privileged to be in South Africa and have the asset management industry that we have in this day. After that, Fatima will come in. Fatima does a lot of reports on BEE statistics. She has incubated a lot of Black asset managers in South Africa. So it will be important for Fatima to give us context in terms of where the future of asset management in South Africa is going. After that, I will sit down with Fatima and Muitheri, and we will go into questions. Over to you, Muitheri. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masiabi. It's a pleasure and a great honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me to speak at the ABSIP Women in Focus. What a wonderful initiative to build community among women in our industry. Thank you, Nomonde, for taking on this important role. We are fortunate to have you. It's also delightful to be up here with Fatima Voda, an industry powerhouse, a business builder, investor, and change maker. Really honored. And to you, Masiabi, we meet again on the stage. Thank you for your warmth and generosity. It's a great honor and privilege to be here for your book review series. I'm often asked how my book, Building Capital, came about. The answer to that question is serendipity. I never set out to write a book, but in 2014, I was invited to speak to a conference, and it struck me that a reasonable address might be one that spoke to the changes that I had witnessed in the industry over 20 years of democracy, and during my career that spanned the same time frame. That conference was ABSIP's 2014 annual conference, and Fatima was there. The focus of my presentation was the question, why do some asset management firms succeed and others fail? I still recall the first slide, a quote from The Economist's book review on the book, The Hard Things About Hard Things, a story of entrepreneurship by Ben Horowitz, a leadership classic and a great read. The quote, "For every starry success, there'll be a multitude of failures, and it's easy to forget that the job of an entrepreneur is often nasty, brutish, and in danger of being cut short by impatient investors, rebellious co-founders, and other hazards." That deeply resonated with my research at Alexander Forbes Investment at the time that focused on longevity of firms in South Africa. Since then, what drives the success of the asset management industry is central to the work that I do at the Asset Management Research Institute. And so began a 6-year journey of discovery filled with 100 interviews, one name leading to another name, for you cannot write this story without speaking to so-and-so. It led to visits to libraries, archives, museums, and conferences here and abroad, shared artifacts, pictures, and memorabilia, like the Actuarial Society of South Africa journals from the 1950s, which I'm still finding a place to keep in my house, from Mike Codron, formerly chief actuary at the FSB. It unearthed performance reports and client documents that went into astonishing detail, written by Alan W.B. Gray and Charles Bailey in the 1980s, explaining a novel investment approach to clients, documents that would still pass muster today, 4 decades on. All the while, I was trying to get a coherent history and fill in the gaps in an under-researched and relatively recent addition to the financial sector firmament in South Africa. Building capital is a history rather than the history. It's a departure point in the necessarily longer project of documenting how assets, wealth, and financial resources have been managed in this resilient, remarkable, and staggeringly unequal country. The question the book is concerned with is, how did this industry develop from its relatively small economic base to reach its present position, given the financial and political challenges that it and the country as a whole has faced over the centuries? It's an attempt to explain the curious juxtaposition of a highly developed financial industry located in a humble emerging market, tracing the contours of the history that paved the way for professional asset management in South Africa. It's also the story of how an industry grew, survived, and thrived, and became world-class relative to its peers in much larger economies. The asset management industry in South Africa is integral to the well-being of millions of South Africa who buy insurance policies and unit trusts or save for retirement. It pools capital for investment and funding projects, providing investors with opportunities and exposure to assets that they would not necessarily be able to access on their own. It stimulates the economy, allocating risk capital to entrepreneurs, businesses for expansion, infrastructure projects, and government in order to generate returns for its client. By so doing, the industry, which today invests close to 9 trillion rand, continues to play an instrumental role, allowing South Africa to accomplish the broader goals of economic and political transformation. In a continent with fledgling capital markets and few asset management firms of size, South Africa stands out for its sophisticated financial services sector, whose well-developed equity, insurance, and credit markets are anchored by strong domestic institutional investors. Today, I will briefly trace the story arc of the asset management industry and conclude with some reflections on what it takes for an asset management industry to thrive. I will contend that this success was not preordained, but rather the accumulation of many factors which I will address. The evolution of the institutional investment industry, that is life insurance companies and pension funds in South Africa, began over a century before asset management firms as they're currently set up were even conceived. The history of asset management in South Africa stretches from the birth of colonial-era insurers in the 1820s, originally an extension of the British insurance industry. Insurers provided financial protection and a safety net to European settlers in an uncertain world. It spans over the subsequent discovery of diamonds and gold, which placed unimaginably vast wealth in the hands of private individuals, and extends further still to the concurrent appearance of banks, stock exchanges, and stockbrokers, and mining finance houses, whose role it was to provide risk capital to invest and grow the mineral wealth. And then yet further to the rise of pension funds, the pension fund industry in the mid-20th century, which trade unions fought hard to make equitable even under apartheid. Add to this journey innovations such as unit trusts in 1965, which expanded investment choice beyond savings deposits, investment clubs, and private client investments, and made the industry accessible to individuals with even modest earnings. Fast forward to 1996, the launch of the first fund supermarket, or investment platform known today as a linked investment service provider, LISP, which dramatically changed the way unit trusts were sold. LISPs remain critical to the success of any asset management firm in the retail market, with more than half of local unit trusts channeled through advisors on LISPs. The discovery of the largest gold reserves in the world in 1886 was the mother lode that catapulted South Africa onto the global stage. It conferred her with influence that would have been otherwise unattainable and provided access to deep capital pools of global capital. Most important for the later development of the asset management industry was the creation of the JSE. The JSE provided a platform for capital raising and the pricing and trading of shares, key building blocks in finance. South Africa's vast mineral wealth was also a magnet for skilled workers. US mining engineers and European financiers in the mining industry, and Scots, renowned for their fiscal probity and reputation for financial innovation in the insurance industry. The existence of a well-structured, formalized savings sector, driven initially by life insurers, and the emergence of a strong pension fund culture, given impetus by the passing of the Pension Funds Act in 1956, had a significant impact on the development of a local economy, capital markets, and professional asset management over the past 7 decades. The industry as we know it took its first steps in the 1950s and 1960s when life offices and pension funds tentatively started to invest in shares. Strong economic growth and wealth creation after World War II, together with conducive regulation, saw fresh industry products such as separately managed pension funds, retirement annuities, and unit trusts taking root. Negative real returns and high and unpredictable inflation from the mid-1970s and a period of declining economic growth amid sanctions and geopolitical turmoil led even the more cautious institutional investors who had traditionally invested only in mortgages and bonds to take the plunge into equities in a desperate search for inflation-beating returns. And thus, in the midst of economic, political, and social turmoil, a culture of institutional equity investing was born. As equity investment became mainstream and pools of capital held by insurers, pension funds, and unit trusts grew, high levels of technical specialization and investment expertise was demanded from asset managers. This demand allowed the investment industry to find its niche. In the book, I recount the stories of some of the industry pioneers, Donald Gordon, Louis Scheel, Alistair Colquhoun, Alan W.B. Gray, Dave Ford, Mr. Menkes, and many others, and their groundbreaking innovations, describing the origins of and obstacles to institutional investment and professional fund management. These entrepreneurs built companies that were the harbingers of new products that increased the addressable savings market for those financial institutions willing to be aggressive in the market, and introduced new business models that disrupted the incumbents. The post-World War II economic environment was fertile ground for innovation, attracting new contenders that invigorated the market with their new investment performance-oriented products and new business models that competed with those of the traditional life insurers. Technological advances and the development of computing power was another major contributor to the evolution of the industry. Technology changed the way investment analysis was done, research, trading, back office, and risk management, while also intensifying competition, improving access to financial information, and raising efficiency and productivity all round. If it is nothing else, the asset management industry is definitely a dynamic, competitive industry that requires firms to adapt, for their competitive advantage today might not be their competitive advantage tomorrow. There are stories in the book of dazzling successes and failures that underscore the vulnerability of investment firms in a rapidly changing environment. As I charted the evolution of the industry over the decades, I was surprised and intrigued by the importance of young companies as idea machines and the single-minded focus required to go against existing high-margin products or larger, better endowed incumbents to disrupt the status quo. For example, the duels between Colonial Mutual and Old Mutual in 1883, and insurgent Liberty Life and the Cape Mutuals in the 60s and 70s, the life-owned asset management firms and the independents in 2000s. All those stories are instructive. Innovation is a critical ingredient for the well-being and sustainability of the industry. Indeed, the economic impact of innovation is clear. According to the industry body, ASISA, the Association of Savings and Investment South Africa, there were nearly 44 million policies in force at the end of 2021, and 11 million new policies sold to South Africans. The industry paid out 608 billion in claims and benefits, compared to 491 billion in 2019. The industry was well capitalized with total assets of 3.7 trillion, more than enough to cover liabilities of 3.4 trillion. The unit trust industry managed 3.1 trillion in assets and offered 1,710 portfolios for investment over the same period. So what does it take to build a successful asset management industry? To thrive, an asset management industry requires 1, wealth creation, a favorable macroeconomic backdrop, access to cheap credit from banks, buoyant investment markets, jobs, money to save and invest to create wealth. 2, institutions. Institutions are the repository of talent and ideas, where core competencies and capacity can be built and experience retained. An early focus on building institutions enabled South Africa to stay ahead. Outside of the UK and the US, there are not many countries where you will find private and public institutions that are over 100 years old. In South Africa, however, the Old Mutual is 176 years old. It's going to be 177 next month. The JSE was born in 1887 and accounted for 3% of total global market capitalization in 1900. The PIC, the government-owned asset management company, was established in 1911. Sanlam was founded in 1918 amid the Spanish flu pandemic. The South African Reserve Bank, which celebrated its centenary last year, was the first central bank outside of England in the British Empire. It opens its doors just 8 years after the US Federal Reserve and way before central banks in New Zealand and Canada and Australia. The first South African bond actuary qualified in Scotland in 1921. In 1946, South Africa's then Minister of Finance, J.F.H. Hofmeyr, was appointed as a governor of the newly created IMF and World Bank. And the first South African CFA charter holder qualified in 1969, 6 years after the inception of the qualification, at a time when few non-Americans had even heard about the qualification. Of note, in South Africa, in 2019, 2019, South Africa's CFA Society had about 2,130 members, was the fourth largest society in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region after the UK, Switzerland, and Germany, and ahead of countries like France, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia, and was among the top 17 CFA societies in the world. 3, for our industry to thrive, it needs capital to invest. Globally and locally, capital flows respond to and are driven by the perceived security of capital, the prospect of attractive returns, and the interaction between the international and local economic environment, geopolitics, and markets. 4, leadership. Leadership that appreciates the intersection of politics and economics and that has an expansive vision for a better society and for sustainable business. 5, business and management skills. For execution is a key differentiator of lasting business success and requires a long-term view. As Naval Ravikant, a prominent investor, puts it, long-term results are always a consequence of long-term thinking. 6, trust and an impeccable reputation. These qualities are crucial to savers' willingness to delegate control over their savings. Lastly, for the industry to thrive, it must continue to be relevant to society. As Linda Mateza, previously of the GEPF, told me, without addressing the fundamental requirements of a growing economy and enlarging financial inclusion, the industry is at risk that the government and society at large do not perceive its value nor its shared sense of destiny and social utility. The ongoing challenges for each one of us in the industry, therefore, are reflected in the quest to answer yet more questions that will shape our thinking about growth and change. How can you use your imagination, your intellectual and material heft to deliver returns and impact? How can we bridge the divides between finance and society by helping others make sense of that which often intimidates them about finance? How can we assist firms and individuals to weather some of the most challenging issues of our times, from pandemics to wars to the financial consequences of climate change? Although we cannot replicate moments of opportunity and serendipity, history can help us envision how the industry could evolve into the future and how best to manage and adapt to the current headwinds it faces. History, our history, is instructive. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My preparation is less polished than Muitheri's, which was extremely polished and well organized. But firstly, I'd like to thank Muitheri, and I don't think Muitheri actually realizes this, but when I got into institutional asset management, Muitheri was actually my first client. When I started a fund of hedge funds business in 2003, she was a consultant to an institutional investor and allocated, I think, a total of 16 million rands to my fund of hedge funds, which was wonderfully exciting because it really triggered that opportunity of building confidence. So I just wanted to get that in, and it's really, really difficult when you're standing on the shoulders of giants to come in after Muitheri. So thank you so much for that wonderful articulation of the history of asset management in South Africa. I mean, you hear these, Muitheri hasn't quoted some of the stats in the book, like the number of shares listed on the JSE in I think it was 1890 or 1900 versus how many shares are listed on the JSE today. And I think there were more shares listed on the JSE in 1895 than there are today. So there's some fabulous data and statistics and information in that book, and it's definitely worth reading. So the reason why I think I've been brought onto the podium was really to talk about the South African asset management landscape. After that fantastic articulation of the history, where are we right now? What kind of trends are we seeing? What have we identified? And as was introduced earlier, we conduct quite a bit of research at 274 investment managers on the South African asset management industry, both from a policy perspective as well as trying to understand trends from an ESG perspective, from a transformation perspective, and really searching for alignment to what is happening on in the global space, but also in the African continent and amongst other emerging markets. And quite a bit has happened, particularly since the global financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. National Treasury recognized the potential instability that future crises can cause to our economy, and worked hard to legislate what we call the Financial Sector Regulation Act in 2017. And that gave birth to 2 regulators in South Africa. And this is quite important because there's still a lot more steps to come from that, which will dynamically change how the intermediary, because the financial sector in South Africa is the house of intermediation between savers and depositors and borrowers and lenders, etc., and contributes in excess of 20% to GDP and employment. So it's a very core component of the stability of our economy. So the FSR Act was legislated in 2017, and from there followed the establishment of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, which is now responsible to ensure the behavior of participants in the financial sector, to ensure good customer outcomes. So that's their focus. But the focus of the Prudential Authority is to ensure the stability of our financial state, of our financial sector. So if insurers, banks, etc., maintain certain amount of capital and reserves to ensure that level of stability. And out of that came out the draft legal framework, which will provide the various regulators with a number of powers as such, which didn't exist before. And that's called the Conduct of Financial Institutions Bill, the Coffee Bill. And the Coffee Bill was first published in draft form in 2018. It was out for commentary. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this, because it's going to have a fairly significant impact on the future of the financial sector. So the first draft was published in 2018, and then the second draft published in 2020. And at the recent budget speech of the Minister of Finance, he mentioned that it will probably be gazetted later this year. And that Coffee Bill provides the legal framework, as I said, but it gives power to certain institutions that they never had before. So one example of that, for example, is the recent release by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority of their transformation plan for the financial services sector. So previously, the FSCA couldn't, if you were an untransformed entity, they couldn't take any action against you, etc. But now, with the new legislation and under the Coffee Bill, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority could have powers to include transformation as a key component of licensing requirements, as a key component of maintaining your license in the sector, but also of your contribution and how you are managed, etc. And they could, in fact, institute things like fines if they needed to, and also take action against firms for blackwashing or those kind of things. So in that context, I mentioned that because some of our focus has largely been in the transformation of the financial sector and on meeting certain financial inclusionary objectives. And that paper is out for comment at the moment from the regulator, and we think that following the Long-Term Insurance Act inclusion of transformation as a key criteria for long-term insurers to gain licenses in the financial sector, that could be extended into the asset management industry. So I think we just got to be aware of that. So I wanted to give you a little bit of heads up on some data and statistics and what we're seeing, particularly also one of the big themes that's going to change the dynamics of the asset management industry in South Africa is the change in regulation. We've already, on the 23rd of February, South African retirement funds and compulsory savers can now invest up to 45% offshore, of which 10% could be in the African continent, excluding South Africa. So that larger base, so exchange controls is now being relaxed. And remember, exchange controls was a core component of the apartheid economy, and slowly following democracy in 1994, exchange controls have been relaxed. So it started for compulsory 5%. I mean, this is half of you, given the amount of opportunities that exists, given that global markets are a lot bigger and wider. It makes absolutely no sense for South African investors to not take up that increased opportunity. But what does this mean for South African asset management firms, who majority have predominantly focused on the domestic markets, and now you've got this opportunity to invest more capital offshore, but you may not have the skill set. One of a lot of debate in the market around how to deal with it, the practical implications of dealing with it. How do you deal with currency-related risk issues? Do you hedge the currency? Do South African asset management firms have equity space? Do yes, everyone, do we have more 91s, developed markets, emerging markets, value, growth, momentum, low volatility, and all the different styles and opportunities that exist? The second area that we're beginning to see a massive fundamental shift in the way South African institutions are investing is the increased limit towards unlisted assets. And you know that government has been working on this for a while now. And it coincides with government's plan, infrastructure development plan, and how South African capital can invest financing opportunities. So with the establishment of the infrastructure office at the presidency, headed up by Dr. Kgosi Ramokgopa, and the subsequent allocation from the fiscus of 100 billion rands towards the Development Bank of South Africa to set up an infrastructure investment unit that would then be responsible for making projects bankable, and attracting, whether it's offshore investments, DFI investments, domestic investments, to invest alongside government to deliver exceptional investment returns for clients, but also to contribute towards our challenges of inequality, poor economic growth, job creation, etc. So in order to be able to do that, government required the law to be changed to accommodate for increased investment by institutional investors to unlisted investments. And in the budget speech again in February, the Minister of Finance indicated that the changes to Regulation 28 of the Pension Funds Act is imminent. And he actually mentioned that it could perhaps be gazetted, changed during March. So we haven't yet heard anything, and we're on the 2nd of April. So it could be coming through quite soon. But what you have begun to see is that the landscape of asset management in South Africa is changing. The new entrants coming to market are not domestic, are not equity managers, they're not bond managers. We are seeing massive strides in innovation coming through. We are seeing the unlisted markets. It's almost as if it's that time for unlisted markets in South Africa. We're seeing opportunities, niche, innovative opportunities amongst venture capital firms. Between Cape Town and Stellenbosch, the amount of new venture capital, fintech firms, etc., we're seeing spring up is incredible, and the opportunities to create jobs within those firms is amazing. We're seeing a lot of deal flow in the private equity space pipeline. We gotta look outside the 295 shares listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and look at the tens of thousands of independent firms that exist outside of the JSE that are there to create jobs, that are there to make a difference, that are there to transform the economy. And it's there where we're seeing a lot of new opportunities and we're seeing appetite. So with that in mind, the growth of skill and talent in the unlisted space is growing exponentially. I've seen exponential growth in the last 5 years, but particularly in the last 3 years. The types of deals we're seeing in that space are also fantastic. We're also seeing, given that this is a women in focus discussion, but women entering the market, we're seeing more women enter that end of the market than the listed space. So for me, that's pretty exciting in terms of new trends going forward. I just want to mention a couple of things. And again, I'm less organized than Muitheri, but because all the ideas just come in my head at the same time. So I need to find a way of organizing them, and I should try and be better at doing that. But if you're entering the asset management space and you're deciding, okay, what is my strategic direction of my business? You're going to have to have a very clear strategic business model on where things are going. So with the growth of passive investing globally, I mean, we know between Vanguard and BlackRock, Zenith would know what the numbers are, but I think just alone between Vanguard and BlackRock, probably around $17 trillion. Something there in passive investments, $17 trillion in passive investments globally, just by two firms. So that growth in passive investments, the squeeze on fees and costs, that fee compression. I mean, we hear it every day. You go, you pitch, you quote a fee, they come back and they squeeze you probably 3 times before you just kind of like breaking even. So fee compression is a huge issue in our market at the moment. So your direction of where you want to play in this market, do you want to be a BlackRock? Do you want to be a beta factory? So all you do is manufacture beta products and you put those products in the market and it's fantastic. You've got 5 basis points products. We track the ALSI, we track the MSCI, we track EM indices, bond indices, etc. And that's where you play. That's where you play. It's simple, it's easy, it's low margin business, and potentially distribution is wide. Or you a niche business, and a niche business is we are really good. We are the best in the industry. There's nobody better than us. We have got the skill, the talent. We are positioned as the leaders in value investing. Nobody can touch us in value investing, and we are those guys. So when you think about a value investor, we don't want to play in all these other things. We don't want to play in balanced funds. We don't want to play in this. We don't want to do that. We just want to focus in global value. And that's the go-to house to do that. So specialized alpha shops, I think that's kind of the future. I think beta factories are kind of the future. I also think that this entire industry is moving away from off-the-shelf products. Nobody wants an off-the-shelf product. Whether you're a small investor that has got 1 million to invest, or you're a 500 million rand investor or billion rand investor, nobody wants to go into an off-the-shelf product. So that client relationship, that change that needs to happen with how you think about clients, how you provide solutions to clients, we finding that that is what people want. And you've got to have the skills, the resources, the technical ability to be able to service those kind of clients. And then, of course, distribution, and particularly with emerging asset management firms who do not have the ability to spend huge amounts of capital for distribution. The wonderful thing about the digital revolution is that access to markets has become so easy. You know, whether you're on Instagram or whether you're on Twitter or whether you can use all the digital channels. You don't need to spend huge amounts of capital advertising on billboards, etc. Because I don't know if you know, but South Africa is the country spends the most amount of time on their cell phones. It's an interesting statistic. There's a company that calculates how much time people spend on their phone. I know I'm probably stealing too much time, but I wanted to also talk about, are we still fine? Are we still good? You got to tell me to keep quiet, because otherwise I can just carry on. So I've spoken about private markets, and what is also very, very important, you know, 14 years ago, we started our Black Asset Manager Incubation Program, and we started seeding managers at that point. And at that point, you could count on your fingertips the number of Black investment professionals that were portfolio managers. Now, we need to be very, very careful in terms of how we think about the South African environment. Because one thing for sure is that businesses, historic businesses, recognize the tailwinds of transformation, and that transformation is good for business. So you have a full Black portfolio management and investment analyst team at a large enterprise that is not an independent Black-owned business. How do you treat that team to an independent Black-owned business? So we've got to be very careful in terms of how we distinguish around transformation imperatives and objectives, because the opportunities to create large-scale jobs, etc., still exist within our sector with a lot of the large firms, and a lot of them are doing the right thing. So we're really going to be, yes, there's this emergence of independent firms, fantastic. There must be a place for everyone to play. And yes, you know, if I think about my journey, and I know part of it is also to talk about how we've gotten here, is that yes, 1994 happened, and democracy, we all voted, and we're all free, and we're all at the same level, right? But now I've got 20,000 rands in my pocket, which was the money I had in 2007 when I started the business. And now I'm put in the exact same race as 50-year-old businesses and 100-year-old business. And now I'm told, okay, well, you're free and everything. You must now go and compete. So you've got no capital, you've got no resources, you've got no backing, you've got absolutely nothing. And you now have to compete at the same level. You don't have all of those things. So what I found very, and I learned that very quickly, very fast, is that if you don't own the means to do business in this economy, you will not succeed. And what do I mean by the means to own business, the infrastructure to what did I say? The means, own the means to do business. If you don't own the means to do business, what do I mean by that? To have the proper licenses and platforms is number one, because as a Black independent business, if you don't have that, You will never, ever succeed in this market. So what did I do? Every single cent that I had, I reinvested into the business and built a capital pool and balance sheet. I did not go and buy a big house. I did not go and buy a big car. I took every single cent and I built a capital base so that when the time came, I had the capital to buy a life company, to put the capital behind that life company so that, you know what, we are independent, we are in control, we can compete with a 100-year-old business now because we've got the infrastructure. And owning the infrastructure is the only way to do business if you want to compete on an equal and fair part. If you look at the collective investment schemes industry that Muitheri spoke about, 3 trillion rands collective investment schemes industry. So if you look at that industry, there is no black market share in that industry from a Manco perspective. So top one, for the past 10 years, the top one firm in the Manco space is Allan Gray. Number 2, Coronation, 91, Stanlib, Ned Group, Old Mutual, Sanlam, ABSA, M&G, and Ford. And the opportunity is not in having the unit trust. The opportunity is having the Manco, because the Manco is where you actually make the money. So I think there's different understandings of what it means to be a player in the financial services industry, and the commitment that it requires to be able to do that. Then the other point I wanted to make is so diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the future of asset management from how we operate and the skills that are required. So the big data is changing asset management. Globally, we've got someone here who's so great to see her. She's come back visiting, who's spent so much time in the UK and working at one of the biggest asset management houses there. But she will also tell you that big data is the future of asset management. Having access to big data and having people that know how to work with big data. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, that is where we need more skills. We have got a machine learning artificial intelligence team. They can take 20,000 equity managers for Morningstar, and they can reduce that universe to a total of 10 asset managers based on features and based on building models that say, okay, for these 20,000 asset managers, we are looking for these 10 attributes: consistency of performance, risk metrics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the artificial intelligence model will go and sift through 20,000 asset managers' history and data, pooling together managers and saying, well, this manager calls themselves value. Are they really value? Are they growth? Are they really growth? Which then allows you to deep dive on 20 managers as opposed to 20,000 managers. But aside from that, just on how to construct portfolios, how to manage money. So those sort of skills at our universities, we need those kind of skills. We need more data scientists within our teams. Access to information, the way Warren Buffett walked into libraries and looked at financial statements, that's all available on Twitter now. That's all of, that information edge. How do you differentiate in active management? Only 20% of active managers outperform their benchmarks. How do you determine that skill set? How do you pick that 20% of a winner from all of them? So the digital transformation space is I think is a big thing. I think one of the big benefits for the smaller asset management firm that allows them to compete at the same level of scale as a larger firm, and COVID triggered all of that. COVID triggered the digital revolution. COVID made a one-person asset management house just as powerful as a 100-person asset management house, because you don't have to have bricks and mortar. You can outsource every core service, and you can just stay at home and manage money. So you don't need to have feet on the ground in New York City for someone, before they used to say, oh, feet on the ground, how can an asset manager based at the southern tip of Africa manage assets in Shanghai? Because you've got the same advantage. That guy doesn't have a better advantage than you if he's sitting in Shanghai and you sitting in Soweto, because access to information is all electronic. So I think that's beginning to change quite a bit. Nearly done. I'm nearly done. Sorry, my watch is also telling me to keep quiet. So let's end off with ESG, climate change, and let's also look ESG and climate change. I mean, the greenwashing has to stop. The greenwashing and the marketing material that people use. Oh, well, we subscribe to CRISA. But we don't have our policy. CRISA's first principle is that you must provide transparency and disclosure and have your policy on your website. Oh, but you don't have a policy. So the greenwashing in our market has to stop. And we, in fact, publishing our ESG asset manager survey this week, coming Thursday at the Origin Centre. And you're all welcome, Origin Centre at Wits University. Come have a cup of tea, come hear about what ESG is all about. But it's very evident that ESG has become a marketing tool by a lot of players in our market, and we've got to prevent against that. South Africa, big issue is management control. We score extremely poorly in management control. Group reporting, when it comes to BE scorecards. Group reporting, I cannot understand how this exists. So you've got a big financial services group with 1,000 subsidiaries, and half of those subsidiaries are 100% white, and that subsidiary is part of a bigger group, and they get a level 1 rating. You automatically get a level 1 rating, and you now compete with a small black enterprise, and you prejudice because that guy's got a level 1 rating, but they're 100% white. But why is that the case? Because of group reporting. Do not be fooled by group reporting. Group reporting must be done away with. It prejudices black people in this country. It prejudices financial inclusion, and we think that it needs to, it's just unacceptable. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. 5 CEOs of the top 100 JSE listed companies are women. No, 2. No, yeah, 5. 5 in total are women. And we've got 18 are CFOs are women. Even amongst the big firms and the independent black-owned firms, women participation is very, very unequal. And it's something that needs to be addressed. And I think the problem is that companies do not know how to deal with this issue. And I've seen it, because you go into an asset management company, you've got the same amount of analysts that are men than are women that are joining at the same time. So you've got 10 analysts joining, 5 are women, 5 are men. But none of the women make it to the next level, and all the men make it to the next level. So there's this gap on how companies can deal with the career and the progression of women within enterprises. That we definitely need to find mechanisms of dealing with that. I think I've kind of touched on quite a few things, and happy to talk about other things on the panel. I do think that there's a couple of risks to everything in South Africa at the moment, and we need to be cognizant of what that means. And also digital currencies. None of us are talking about it because we know that it's unregulated, but we know that there's a lot of development happening internationally on that front. But yeah, I think I've covered most of it. I want to thank Nomonde. Thank you for organizing and for inviting me. I'm very grateful. Thank you to ABSIB, and great to see my old friend Tapiwa. and everybody else, and Muitheri, of course, and everyone that's made it both virtually as well as in person. Thanks so much.
Sure, quite a mouthful that's been said between Fatima and Muitheri. Lots of words of wisdom. I'm actually left dumbfounded because most of the questions that we probably would have had today have been answered between the two of them. But I think there is still an opportunity for us to ask questions, so I will probably kickstart the questions. Please do guide me. Just put up your hand so that the panelists can see you, and you're welcome to ask any question that you have. But maybe as a start, Muitheri and Fatima, you highlight the issue around, women, as being an issue that needs to be dealt with within South African context. Are organizations actually dealing with that issue? I mean, if I look at your survey, and you talk about the number of women asset managers in South Africa, I mean, they are pretty much non-existent. It's growing, but at a much smaller pace than sort of their male counterparts. So how do we get women to participate more within the asset management industry?
I mean, it's very simple. So you do need intervention. But I think it comes down to leadership. So culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if the culture of the organizations in South Africa do not make that step towards change, and if you don't have the right leadership, you're never going to get to where you need to be.
Thank you. I have to agree with Fatima, but I also want to say that I'm encouraged, and I'm encouraged because there's a regulatory impetus. So I think you will see more women. And I think the other thing that I want to just mention here is, I was thinking about this yesterday, the impact of women when they are there is significant. I was thinking about property sector, where you find some of the top managers are actually Black. And I thought about where they started, and actually very central to that story is a certain woman in a certain organization, Stan Liberty, and she had such impact in terms of the people that train under her, that's come out from that business and go and set up property firms. And I think the same of Fatima. Fatima has had an enormous impact on transformation of asset management industry. If it wasn't for her, I don't actually think the industry would look the way it does. So that women do need to be in these positions because their ability to multiply a situation is amazing, and we need to write about these stories. And those are two people that come to mind that have had an enormous impact, and we are fortunate for it.
Anyone else? Can I just ask another? Do you want to go?
Thank you. My question, I think, is directed to Fatima. With regards to the regulation and it increasing to 45%, well, I understand what it means for the financial sector, but then for capital flight, how does that then impact South Africa at a local level from a capital flight perspective?
So yes, there will be a capital flight because money will be moving offshore. It's something that we've spoken to the regulator over and over again. Like, if you think about it, if a South African firm wants to establish a UCITS compliant fund, they have to go to Luxembourg or Dublin to do that, because you can't register a dollar denominated fund in South Africa. And, hopefully this will change the regulator's mind now and say, well, the FSCA should be, because we've got the Section 65 thing. So you register your fund in Luxembourg or Dublin and bring it back to South Africa via a different route of Section 65 approval. It's very complex and complicated. And now, given the potential for capital flight, I think the regulator needs to allow us to register hard currency denominated funds in this country. Hopefully that answers.
Thank you very much for the discussions and the presentation. It is really insightful. There was something, Muitheri, that you said about history and how it can help us envision how the industry can evolve into the future. And I think of myself, so it's more of a personal question now, and I think, I have a part to play to make history. One day my children will be up here talking about the impact that we have made to the industry. And so my question is on a personal level to ask, what do you think, as someone who has grown up here in South Africa, who has deep roots here, who will never forget what I've gained here, working now globally, I want to make a positive contribution to help shape the future of the asset management industry in South Africa. And to you both, what bit of advice would you give to me and others out there who have left South Africa to bring back the skills, the things that we learn, to bring it back home?
Sitting at your London desk, there's opportunities. We're rolling out our infrastructure program. We need those big institutional investors sitting in the UK to come and invest in South Africa. South Africa's fantastic, man. I mean, drive around the country, look at the opportunities, from the agri space, agri processing, food security is becoming a huge issue in the world. We've got some of the most advanced, innovative, technology-driven farming community in this country. I mean, our farming industry is the best in the world. Bring them here, tell them to invest in farming technology, tell them to invest in our infrastructure. There's massive opportunity. And with increased capital flows, we get increased growth, we get increased fiscus, more tax, more job creation, the trickle-down effects is amazing. So South Africans, while you're that side, and send the money our way.
I agree. I would also say that you have a responsibility when you're in those environments to make sure that there's a light shown in South Africa that paints a picture of a country that has unusual financial services skill, uniquely deep capital markets. Let people know this because it's not widely known, and you have a responsibility to to shine a light on the story of South Africa, so that it's not just about crime, that there's another narrative. We all have that responsibility.
I just want to add something to that. So I attended President Ramaphosa's 4th investment conference last week, and the first panel he had was the CEO of Naspers South Africa, Anglo-American, and Adrian Gore of Discovery. And at the same time, Minister Ibrahim Patel was showing, because this is the 4th investment conference, all these commitments have been made from previous years, where have that money been spent? And if you actually witness how that money has been spent and, building of the Toyota factory, we're the only country in the world that's manufacturing the new hybrid Toyota Cross, exporting to 40 countries in the world, building the C-Class Mercedes-Benz, what we're doing in the Eastern Cape with the manufacturing of vaccines, all of that has come through. It's actually come through. So the thing is, we as South Africans, we need to change the narrative. You know, what Naspers has done with Take a Lot, creating 25,000 jobs for people that are dropping off parcels every day. You know, we've got amazing buckets of excellence in this country, but we focus on, yes, load shedding and potholes and all of that. Yes, it's all there and people must continuously be put under pressure. But in your mindset, we've got to change the narrative, because then only we'll start seeing the cyclicality of good vibes feeding through.
I just want to add one other thing. People have a big responsibility in making their communities, their country better. It's not somebody else's job. It is you deciding, what can I do for my country? What can I do for my community? And when everybody has that kind of mindset, you can change whatever you set out to do. So you've got a big responsibility because you're in London. Make sure our story is told.
Thank you, Muitheri and Fatima, very powerful. My other question relates to what Fatima spoke about, where you said that, you know, we got to be careful about this corporate reporting. And before that, you actually alluded to something that was quite important and something I wanted to ask you around, you know, is transformation mainly attributed to Black asset managers, or do we actually see a meaningful contribution from the mainstream asset managers as well? So my question to you is, why are these corporates reporting and trying to make as if they transformed when they potentially are not? And how do we actually fix that so that the transformation is actually genuine and it's not just cocked up?
I think we must separate, when you say the large firms that are not, so there are firms that are doing exceptional work in transforming their businesses. I mean, there are a couple of big firms where the full investment team, like I said, are Black, or you know, a majority of their staff, etc. So there are those that are making the change, and then there are those that just believe that you know, this is an S element that's got nothing to do with us, and we money managers, and we're just going to manage money. And you can see the impact of that, because there's one such money manager that's got a strong reputation in the market for delivering performance, etc., that has always shied away from transformation objectives, and money moves away. Money does move away, because at the end of the day, the asset owner has got rights to decide that they want to invest with people who have an alignment to their belief system. Are we continuously told by trustees of retirement funds, we believe in these principles. We want to work with people who believe in these principles. And if you are not aligned to our principles, we do not want to work with you. So you see it happening. But asset owners also really appreciate that, you know, they definitely intervene with firms that are not willing to take the steps and have those plans in place. So companies have responded very, very positively. Absolutely. Yeah, companies in South Africa on the large have responded incredibly well. And also, we've got to understand that they have a huge capital base, so the level of impact that they can achieve is also much more significant. And if you look at the design of the BBBE scorecard, it's not just about ownership. It's about preferential procurement. It's about enterprise supplier development. It's about consumer financial education, about CSI activities, about management control, about skills development. So you've got to perform in all of these areas to do well. And there are companies who are really, really investing a lot in improving across all of those elements. And they're doing well financially, you know, because they believe they've recognized that transformation is good for business. So profitability has increased. And those that just remain adamant, we've seen their profitability come down.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor, ma'am?
Thank you to both Muitheri and Fatima. I think today is what I envisioned, having these courageous conversations. And just following up on Masi's question around the things that you mentioned, Fatima, on group reporting. It's quite important for us not to also talk at it at a high level. So my question was, when I looked at that FSCA transformation bill, there is an element where it's missing in terms of in the detail. From ABSA's perspective, we actually, in our submission on the comments on the draft bill, it still talks around, measuring on ownership. Whereas you actually need to drill down to how does the company infiltrate transformation at all levels, starting from executive right to the bottom, even at board diversity, from a board diversity perspective. The other element is, once we have the bill, it's the so what in terms of the implementation. How does the industry then collaborate from a credibility of the data audits that the FSCA will need to do going forward? I just need an insight from yourselves in terms of how do you see that panning out, because it will need some sort of collaboration and for us to keep in check from implementation of those transformation initiatives.
Okay, so let's start with it. So as I mentioned earlier, the coffee bill now gives the FSCA powers to be able to institute any type of action against firms that are not transforming, and that's what the paper says. The paper also says that there is not enough data and statistics across the entire financial services sector, and the FSCA is setting up a unit within the regulator to be able to collect credible data, because the BE Commission's data is sector specific and overall level, but they want more granular detail on transformation. So they're setting up that. So I think that will help them measure transformation across the entire financial services industry. But at the end of the day, a key component of what they said was, we will depend on the Financial Sector Transformation Council and the Financial Sector Code when it comes to transformation. So at the end of the day, everything falls back on the BBBE Act. Now, under the BBBE Act, we've got the generic codes and then we've got the sector-specific codes. We fall under the Financial Sector Code. The last gazetted Financial Sector Code was in December 2017. We are currently busy with the review process of the 2017 code. These codes are always a compromise between the four constituencies of NADLAC. That's the four pillars of NADLAC. So it's government, labor, trade associations, which is business, and in this case, ABSA and community also play a role. And that's where a lot of the giving and taking takes place, with things like, for example, group reporting, etc. But I can assure you that things like the retirement fund scorecard, which in the 2017 code is voluntary for the top 100 retirement funds, there's enough commitment by government to make that compulsory in the new iteration of the code. So when it becomes compulsory in the new iteration of the code, it will mean that retirement funds will have to get scored like a private company, and asset owners will be able to look at how they've scored and make their calls from there. So I think the new iteration of the code is going to be very, very different. There's a lot of emphasis. One of the priorities of the National Treasury, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, is transformation. They've publicly said that that is their number one priority: financial inclusion, transformation. So their influence, they have a seat at the table when we change the code. So I think a lot of their views and comments, etc., comes through that negotiating table process, and we will see the changes come through in the next iteration of the Financial Sector Code, which will also incorporate. ABSA played one of the most critical roles in the 2017 parliamentary hearings on transformation of the financial services sector. We spent days in Parliament boxing and fighting and making our views known regarding transformation. And following that, the Parliament released a white paper, and as the FSTC, we need to take all of those points that were listed in the white paper, from tow truck drivers being prejudiced by short-term insurance companies to the ordinary South African not getting access to a banking teller in Pofadder, to the asset management industry. So it's a big job, because it's the Financial Sector Code spans quite a big sector, and we've got to be very careful in terms of how we do that. But I can assure you that the FSCA has a seat at the table and are very influential in the direction of the way this code is developing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think my question is to both of you, and it's just an overarching question, and it's like a chicken and egg question, where we talk about the growth of asset management and the growth of unlisted investments and all these innovations that are happening in that space. And you're talking about the 5 or 6 aspects that would cause asset management to thrive in South Africa, and you mentioned a few about wealth creation, leadership, etc. When you look at spaces, particularly the unlisted spaces in South Africa, part of these things are driven also by how the economy is growing, and things like how entrepreneurial spirits is being influenced in a country. So when you have governments that are not really influencing an entrepreneurial spirit, and you have certain sectors like fintech and agriculture, etc., that are thriving, and other sectors that are being forgotten, and you're having an influx in an unlisted space where you're having private equity players, venture capital that is growing and getting capital, but it's within an economy where there's no growth, and it's challenging, which creates difficulty to realize the value that they'd like to realize, and to realize the growth that they're trying to sort of create in that industry. How do you see that sort of influx of capital working out in the long term, in terms of them being able to reach the returns that they were aiming to reach in the next 5 or so years, if the government doesn't put in place policies that will build an entrepreneurial spirit for South Africa, and not just that will benefit the high growth tailwind areas like fintech and agriculture, and that will benefit any normal entrepreneur, not just the people in Stellenbosch, but anyone who is not employed and they want to start a business?
So I'll start, because I feel that this will also be another place where Fatima will be able to give you the granular information. I don't think it's government's role to spark entrepreneurship, but I do think it's government's role to be an enabler, to remove obstacles so that entrepreneurial spirit can take off. And when I look at what is being said at different forums which Fatima will sometimes be in the room, and that's why she needs to weigh on this one, I get the impression that there's a real commitment to make significant changes, policy changes, that will start to remove those intractable obstacles for entrepreneurs to really be able to take it forward. So I'm really hopeful that there's a real commitment to doing that. From a institutional investor space, the kind of space that I'm acquainted with, the idea that Regulation 28 could potentially allow people to invest significant amounts in infrastructure. There is the potential upcoming reform around the two-pot systems of pension, which is looking at the idea that, there's too much leakage in terms of savings. But we also accept that individuals need monies from time to time for certain emergencies. So by creating those two pots, the 1/3 that is accessible and the 2/3 that must be invested until retirement, that completely changes the playing field in South Africa, because it means institutional investors now can take a suitably long-term view. That is incredible news for the future of the industry. So I remain hopeful, I remain optimistic, but it is government, where government needs to play its role is creating enablement, regulation that is conducive to stability, that is conducive to participants, whether they be private or public participants, to be able to do what they need to do and do it well and quickly. Lastly, I will say there's a need to just make sure South Africa is an attractive investment destination. And it's the narratives we give about South Africa. Because in the story, in the book, one thing that struck me is that this is an industry that has to be anchored globally and locally to succeed. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll go through that quite quickly. So Muitheri's raised very, very important points. I mean, to be an attractive investment destination and to generate the level of economic growth that you require, you've got to have certain boxes that are ticked. So one is policy certainty. And I can definitely see that we're moving in the right direction following the auction of the spectrum that took place 2 weeks ago. I mean, that was something that we've been waiting for about over 11 years. Nobody could get that wrapped up, was the auction of the spectrum. So that's huge. President Ramaphosa. So that's allowing, so there's a limited amount of spectrum that the mobile phone companies can use, and with more spectrum being auctioned, there's a court case between Telkom and Vodacom and MTN at the moment around, they had more capital to participate in the auction. But anyway, there's more spectrum that will allow more digital inclusion and 5G and all those nice things in the digital space. But the point is around the fact that it took 11 years to get to that point. But our president managed to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is we're beginning to see changes in the RET faction. So the tension within the ANC between the RET faction and the other faction seems to be the other faction seems to be winning, which is good for business, and we've got to put it out there. And then the creation of this red tape to get rid of all the red tape. So the president announced that as well. So I thought that was quite positive to create the enabling environment that Muitheri spoke about. And then just yesterday, I think Moody's upgraded us to stable again. So that was nice. And I think Edward Kiswater also announced record inflows. SARS collected quite a bit of money. I think it was about 1.3 trillion rands or something. So that was positive. And you know what the horrible thing to say is that the challenges that Europe is facing now with Ukraine has actually been positive for the South African economy. I mean, the rand is sitting at 14 rand 50, We haven't seen that in a very, very long time. We're seeing inflows coming in on a daily basis into our bond market and our equity market. So it's on the back of pain that we kind of benefiting because we are a commodities-based industry and will satisfy the needs of the gaps that Russia and Eastern Europe are leaving. Then just a couple of things. I mean, we need to reduce those CDS spreads. So, but that will happen. And we're sitting much better than our emerging market peers. So we're sitting much better than the likes of Turkey and Brazil and all of those countries. What keeps asset managers awake at night? Low economic growth, government indebtedness. So we've got a trajectory that's mapped out and it needs to be sorted out. Economic policy certainty, political risks, and that's an ongoing issue. What happened in KZN last year, we now have to rebuild all of that. That takes away from the fiscus in asset management. Too much competition, too many players, limited pool of capital, cannibalism taking place amongst firms, no new money coming to market, people taking their wealth outside. Every single high net worth individual that I know is externalizing their capital. Following what happened in KZN last year, I think we've had, because we have quite a massive retail client base of high net worth individuals, and they all externalized their capital last year, and we're continuously seeing individuals externalizing their capital, all taking advantage of the SARS offshore allowance, so a lower pool of capital. I think while we like regulation, it must be enabling. So too much red tape, when regulation becomes too costly to do business, it becomes a problem, and we see that in South Africa. Fee compression in our industry is a really, really big issue. So eventually people just not making money, you know. And my pet hate project is the reduction in the number of standalone retirement funds in favor of umbrella arrangements. The mega umbrella funds are just eating away everybody else's lunch. And it's also creating huge imbalances in our industry. And that is why, alongside the paper that was released on the two-part retirement system, alongside the paper that was released on the two-part retirement system was a paper to overhaul the umbrella fund industry, and that is something that is totally welcoming.
Thank you. Any more questions? I'll ask probably the last one before I get into your spaces as women. Fatima, I mean, you touched on it in terms of the retail sector. As an individual, when I'm having to decide how I'm going to structure my investments so that they can grow and I can achieve all my goals, there seems to be an industry with a lot of products. How does one navigate all these products that are prevalent within the financial services industry?
I've got it. So look, I mean, access to information is very easy now, right? Online, so you can go into platforms, you can run. There's a lot of what do you call these guys that you don't need financial advisors? So yeah. So access to information is very robo advisors, etc. So easy equities, you know, there's a lot of access to information, and everyone's literate and using their cell phones. So I think that's quite easy. I think the challenges are going to be for the big 4, 5 that have always benefited from retail flows and, you know, the standard, well, historically, the standard institutional selection and then the standard retail selection. Okay, so if you look at any financial advisor's recommendations, it's literally exactly what Alexander Forbes has done over the years through the Performer portfolio. And, you know, 25% Ellen Gray, 25% Coronation, 25% 91, 25% whoever. So that sort of model, and that's the standard template that everyone's used over the years. But we're beginning to see that change now. We're beginning to see people invest directly in equity markets through the platforms such as Easy Equities. We're beginning to see people dabble in cryptocurrencies. I mean, which bride do you not go to now and people tell you, oh, have you bought Bitcoin? I'm like, no, I have no idea what Bitcoin is. But anyway, Bitcoin, I mean, there's the offshore platforms, your bank, you deposit your money and at the same time it asks you if you want to buy something. So I think, yes, there's a lot out there and people have to filter through a lot of it. But I think people have the capacity to do so through the digital transformation. And then, yeah, financial advisors, fees. It's not necessary to have financial advisors. I mean, 3% upfront, people have been robbed for way too long. 3% upfront, ongoing fees of 1.5%. Nobody wants to pay that in a low growth environment when markets are delivering 5% annualized returns and you're paying 5% away to your financial advisor and your capital's not even beating inflation. You actually just keep your money under the mattress.
Thank you, Fatima. Muitheri, you spoke a lot about your book, but I'm not sure that you actually told us about your story. Would you maybe like to end off today by telling us about your story, who you are, what drives you, and what next for you? And Fatima, if you don't mind, would you also just share more about who you are and what your next chapter looks like?
So for me, it's quite simple. I said to the team the other day, every day is like the first day when I started 27-4. So that same level of excitement and enthusiasm to discover something new and learn something new. I mean, we came into 2022 with 4 big ideas. One, registering a suite of funds in London through the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. We're busy with that process, so opening up an office in the UK at the moment, so maybe we'll come visit you. So that was something that was put on our exco, and we're halfway there. Listing South Africa's first is agri bond on the sustainability segment of the JSE. We're listing at the end of May. So that's going to be fantastic, focusing on food security and sustainability and really creating an opportunity to invest in our agri space. Launching a venture capital fund. We've just done that. And I think there was one more, which we've also done. So, every day is exciting, every day is new, every day is refreshing, and I still feel 21 and I can go on.
You had not done or you had done because you've done so much?
No, I wouldn't have done anything differently.
It's great, Fatima. Thank you for sharing.
So, what do I say? I'm curious. I want to know why things work. And that's at the heart of who I am and what I do. And I started a research and consulting business in 2020, which was fairly daunting because, it was hard lockdown. But I am doing what I love. I'm working with people I enjoy. I'm committed to an industry whose story fascinates me every day. And people like these and everybody in the room who keep me sharp. And I couldn't be happier to have found what I love. I have 3 girls, and I hope that I am a reasonable example to them. But when I think of, I'm often asked, like, what would I What would I love to tell my children? And there are many things, but the one thing that I want to tell the room is that it's good to have different types of friends. Peers, people the same age, who you can relate to at that particular time. Older friends, whose lives are a window in what the future might look like. And younger friends, who you might be able to tell the mistakes you made or things that you discovered, that they might not have to go through all the things that you stumbled through. I think that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Muitheri. Thank you, everybody. I hope you found the session useful. In ending, I would like to call Nomonde up so that she can, together with myself, present the gift to our amazing women, Muitheri and Fatima. Thank you for those words of wisdom, and hopefully some of us will walk away here today creating new friends. Thank you. You're all welcome to stick around if you want to, address Muitheri or Fatima at the end of a session. You're welcome to do that. Otherwise, there's food for you, there's drinks. Please feel free to indulge rather. Thank you.